Hello and welcome to another video. I recently, on one of my videos about building a pedal, got a comment from someone who was struggling with building pedals and having a lot of issues and a lot of frustration, and I felt the person's pain a lot because as I started building pedals I ran into many walls and many problems and a lot of things that didn't go as I wanted them to, and I failed a bunch of times. And this was before I started my YouTube channel, and since then, as I've built things, I've not had that many issues with the things that I've made. There have been some mistakes, there have been some things that I've had to correct, but you haven't heard that much about it. And I think as YouTubers who are doing videos where they're trying to show you how to do something or teach you something, it's sometimes really hard to show mistakes and problems because you think that that will mean that you don't know what you're talking about and that the things that you're trying to convince people that you are somewhat professional. But as I am not the kind of person who builds pedals and sells them, I am more into the guitar parts and things like that. I've decided that I'm going to share the mistakes I make, and some of the mistakes that I'm going to share with you now are mistakes that I did in the beginning and I've stopped doing them. Some of the mistakes are things that I am still doing and that I am doing on basically every pedal that I make, and I don't know why I can't stop making them. It's just small little, I don't know what you want to call them, noob things maybe. But I've decided that I'm going to share it with you because in the comment he wrote basically that there's something lacking in the pedal building community about mistakes and when things go wrong, and so I thought maybe I could start that up. I'm going to try to put in hashtags for Brian Wampler and also Scott, is that his name? At the JHS, because I know that they are both very capable and hopefully somehow they can get in on this and maybe also make videos about common mistakes that could occur when you're trying to make pedals, and so that maybe, I don't know, we can help people out who are stuck in a rut with their pedals and their builds and that are getting angry and frustrated. He is doing what I'm always telling you guys to do, which is talk to me so that I can try to help you, but it is really hard to do that in comments. It's really hard to try to understand when you don't know where someone lives and you don't know if there is anything different about like how electricity works in different parts of the world. You might have like standardized way for like an outlet in the wall that is different than they are for me. And so pedal companies that are shipping worldwide will be better at knowing those sort of related issues, I think. So I'm going to try to hashtag the Wampler and the JHS in the description below, and hopefully we can get them to chime in on the common problems. Anyway, I have a list here of my most common mistakes that I am making, and so I'm gonna just go through them real quickly, and hopefully you can try these out and think about them when you're building pedals, or try them out and look through your pedal that isn't working and see if any of these that I'm reading up here will work for you. The first one is soldering a jack the wrong way around. Basically, the jack is supposed to connect to your cable and it will look like this, and the tip is the positive and the negative, the ground, is the sleeve. And sometimes I get the little connections on the female connector mixed together, and I solder the positive to the negative, you know. And I've actually done this in videos, and there are people who have commented on my videos asking me why I'm doing that, and I've had to tell them that, oh, that's a mistake I did in the video, and I had to correct it afterwards. And I didn't know until afterwards, basically, that I did a mistake. And yeah, Usually when I make a video and I make that mistake, I look through it and I see if I said the right thing but made a mistake, and if it's visible to the point where it's going to be confusing, I'll do some sort of editing. But if it's just, you know, you seeing something be connected and you hear my voice saying the right thing, I leave it in. And so if you've seen that and you've actually been confused, it's because I've deemed it okay enough that it wouldn't be confusing. And so if you are confused by it anyway, I'm sorry for that, but it's basically a mistake. And I know I've done it in at least a couple of videos. My next thing is dirty solder joints. You hear people say that a lot, like, make sure you have clean, nice solder joints. And you might think that that's not as important as it actually is. And I've done things where I've built everything really well, and I've thought everything was great. But then afterwards I've measured it and I've noticed that things aren't connected. And I then reheat the solder joints and I clean them up and I fix them. And I realized that, hey, the issue was that they weren't clean enough. So make sure that you do. This is what I use to clean my tip, which is where most dirt and issues of that nature will appear. So I prefer one of these over a sponge, but you need to try both and figure out what works best for you. Don't just do what I'm doing completely, blindly, without trying things out. I can only tell you what works for me and what I think is the better. The next thing, and this is actually maybe a little bit funny, and that is that I mix up sometimes in and out on input jacks. And basically, when you look at a pedal like this, your guitar goes in here and the signal comes out here. But when you're soldering everything inside of a pedal, it all gets turned around. So you might think that this is in and this is where it comes out, but that's not right because it's flipped around. And so I've made that mistake, and sometimes I can't figure out what is wrong and I get angry and frustrated, and then I try plugging things in backwards and then all of it works. The way I do it now is that I usually plug this in. So I'm like, oh, here's the pedal. Obviously now it's backwards for you, but like this, I plug it in and I'm like, oh, that's the input jack. That's the input jack, and I flip it around. I'm like, okay. And that's just one of those small things that can really mess you up. And sometimes I even do it inside of the pedal and nothing works. And I have to go in and I have to look. That's why I always use colors and things like that to make everything really easy for me. If you look at my videos, for example, I have a video called something like how to wire a true bypass switch. And everything is color coded. I'm using black wires for ground. I use blue wires for in, I use green wires for out, you know, just to stop myself from confusing myself. And it's not something that I do that often anymore, but I've done it more than I care to admit. The next one is broken parts. Sometimes you will use old parts or parts you've scavenged from some other build or something, and you just assume that things will work because you took it from something that was working, and stuff breaks or some things are on the verge of breaking and you're using them in a different context, and then you measure them afterwards because you're frustrated and you can't for the life of you figure out why it doesn't work. So you just measure things and then you realize, oh, they're broken. So try to make sure that you're using things that are actually working. Old potentiometers that you took from a guitar or something like that, and you want to reuse them because you don't want to waste money on buying new parts. I get it, but at the same time, make sure they are actually working the way they're supposed to, because sometimes you put something into something and it's not that you're bad at soldering, it's that you're using things that are broken. Okay, so the next one is one that I've done a lot of times and it's cost me a lot of issues, and I've actually broken things this way. For example, I did a video called how to rehouse a Danelectro pedal, And that one was a lot of trial and error before I actually was able to make the video. And one of the biggest issues was that I destroyed the PCB when I put it into the box, because the box is, you know, a finite amount of space, and you can try to make things work and fit in there, but it's always better to use a bigger box if things feel like they're too tight and something might get damaged. And I've damaged things putting them into the box. And another thing is, if you look at the back of a PCB, you have all these little connections, all these little solder joints, and if they get connected to the back of an enclosure, you know, the plate here, ground issues can occur. And if you look inside a pedal that you've bought, everything is usually, unless there's something really weird and shady you've bought from, I don't know, some crazy country, whatever. Everything is usually very nice and neat, and there's usually space for things to not get, you know, weird connections between each other. But when you're building pedal kits, you might get a rat's nest and things like that going, and so things might touch. So I've had pedals that work when I don't have the back lid on, and then when I put the back lid on, the pedal just stops working. And the way I've solved this is either by, you know, cleaning everything up a little bit and making cables shorter and making sure things look a little bit nicer. But in cases where that isn't really an option, I've also done things like tape over connections with like electrical tape, and make sure the back has like tape over it, the lid on the inside here, so it's not, you know, bare metal. And also things like putting plastic little bags over PCBs and things like that. It's maybe not the, you know, most professional solutions, but it's something that can work if you need to do that. Another mistake that I've done, that is one of those minor things that is an issue that I feel like, you know, will occur, you know, we all make a mistake, is mixing up the legs on LEDs. All LEDs have a plus and a minus, basically. And sometimes you solder plus to minus instead of plus to plus. You know, connections getting messed up. Sometimes it's really hard to look at a PCB and see like, oh, that part there needs to go over there, and that thing is flipped upside down. Yeah. So that's another thing you should look. If things aren't working, maybe look at your LED and see, is it really the right way around? Maybe Google a little bit, see if you can figure it out. But it's a common thing, you know, it's usually just a little blob with two legs that sticks out, and it's very easy to mix them up. And it happens. Same thing goes with transistors. It's a little half pie thing, half moon thing maybe. And it has 3 legs, and it's very easy to get that turned around the other way than it should be. Most like PCBs and things like that will have a picture of a little half circle thing, and it will show you the way it goes in, but some don't. And I've even had some where it's actually wrong to put it in that way. You know, those things occur. Just because you've bought a pedal kit and you got everything you need in the kit doesn't mean that the PCB is necessarily correct. There can be mistakes there too. So that could be an issue that you need to look into. And it's really easy to make that mistake. I know that it might sound like it's a mistake you can't make, but it's, at least it's happened to me. The next thing is the power adapter. You have 2 connections inside here, and the way the power adapter works is that you have usually an outer metal part and an insulator up here. You will usually see it as a black little ring, and then you have a connector inside. And you have to make sure that the inner connection on the male connector that is connected to your power adapter and the female connector, the one that is on your pedal here, that both have the same plus and minus basically. It's one of those things that have become more standardized, but if you're using an off-brand power connector or adapter, that might be an issue. And it's one that I've done as a mistake. I've finished a pedal build and I've been really happy about it, and I thought this is going to be great. I've plugged it in and things have not been working the way I thought they would, and then I've changed out the power for one that I know comes from like a Boss or something like that, and then it works. Another thing with power adapters is that you should use the right one. I mean, some pedals have 12 volt and some have 9 volt. Make sure you're using the right one, but it's also an impedance value, I think it's called. I'm sorry for the English word, but it's amp. It usually says on the back, and you have to make sure that works as well, because you might overload. It's about how much voltage the pedal takes and how much it takes at a time. Is that correct? I might be wrong. Anyway, make sure you're using the right kind of voltage that goes into your pedal also. So it's not just about like, is plus and minus going in the right way in your pedal? It's also a question of, is the right amount going in? Because, you know, if you put in 12 volt into a 9 volt, you'll fry things. Another thing is that a lot of LEDs are not the same. I have different LEDs here, for example, or at least I thought I did, but this pedal has a very tiny little LED, and this pedal here has a very big LED. And this LED is a 6 volt, I think. And the thing is, you might, because in most kits you will get a 2.2k resistor to put on the LED so that you don't fry it when you plug in your 9 volt. But the thing is, you need to adjust that to your LEDs. So depending on what sort of LED you're using, maybe look into that. And that's one of the things that can be a problem when you're buying a kit, but you want to switch out the LED for something a little bit cooler. And maybe you want to modify the kit as well, change things around, and it might get a little bit messy. So make sure you're thinking about that when you're working with LEDs and resistors and things like that, that like you have power that goes into the pedal, and you don't want to starve the circuit of electricity, but you also don't want to overheat it with electricity, because you can fry things. And it goes obviously for everything, but since, you know, it's about like maybe doing some DIY things and adding making something into a pedal that isn't necessarily a pedal to begin with, that's where some issues can occur. And my last part is overheating components. It's one of those things that is actually a little bit harder to do than you might think if you're working fast and you're being cautious about it. You shouldn't really have any issues, but overheating parts is actually sort of easy to do. It's more something I feel like you do when you've started out and you are maybe not paying attention so much to how warm your soldering iron is and how long you're holding it to parts. But it's still something that happens from time to time. We all make mistakes, and I don't do it that often anymore, but it does happen sometimes. And the issue is that on some parts it can be really easy to figure out when you've destroyed something, because you just you basically see them melt or pop off or burn in front of you, so it's kind of obvious that they are destroyed because they're falling apart. But other parts are kind of hard to see that they are actually not working any longer because of the heat. So yeah, that's where like having a multimeter, which is this thing here. And I know that it might sound like a boring thing to have to buy, because it's like, why do I have to have all these things just to build pedals? I just want to build pedals. Isn't it enough that I have a soldering iron? And the thing is, I've made a video about like what I use to make pedals and the things I use on the side that is extra things. And you do need some of those things. And the multimeter, I've said it before, I've said it so many times in videos that if you're subscribed and you've been that for a while, you're probably tired of hearing it, but it's really, you know, it's really important to have. And I built my first couple of pedals without a multimeter, and I didn't have any issues, but that's because I was lucky that everything worked out fine. It's when things are not working out and you're starting to get angry and frustrated that you're gonna be really happy you have one. So if you live in a world where nothing ever goes wrong, you don't need one of these, because everything is just smooth sailing. But I mean, do you honestly live in a world where nothing ever goes wrong? because if that's true, I want to trade places with you. Anyway, I hope that helped. Let me know in the comments below if it did. And also, if you have things that you have come across as you have built pedals that are issues, and if you have any suggestions, write those comments below, because we need to help each other out more. And that's something that is important, because it's not always about, you know, building something that works and is awesome. And like, you don't see that many of my things coming up where I show you a bunch of mistakes, and it's, you know, it's because I don't make that many mistakes anymore. I've been building pedals for a couple of years now, and I didn't start making videos about it until I had already learned a bunch of the mistakes. But I try to let you know when I do something that is stupid or wrong. I do have some weird mistake things. Like here is, for example, I wanted to make a horror musical instrument, sort of like the Apprehension Engine thing that I did a couple of years ago. And I had this weird idea that I would build a string instrument, but with springs instead. And it doesn't work in any way. It's really bad and really stupid. And when I think about why it doesn't work, it's really painfully obvious to me. And I didn't make a video because there was no point in showing you how to build something that doesn't work. But it's not because I don't feel like it's important or I'm ashamed or anything like that. It's just, it didn't pan out right. But now you know, I totally built this stupid thing. So, ended up in a video anyway. And I have another one. I didn't just make one, I made two. And it's the same thing with this thing that I made here, for example. I wanted to make a vibrator for my guitar strings. And it's just a tiny little motor with a weight that is off balance. And it's actually from a Xbox controller that broke. And the thing is, I thought it would be really cool to have some weird string vibrator thing, like make a DIY EBO, you know, thing, but it didn't work. And it didn't turn out cool. I mean, it works basically because it's functioning. I didn't do anything wrong, but it doesn't do what I was hoping it would do, and it isn't as cool as I was hoping it would be, so there was no real point in making a video showing you it. But there is another one of my mistakes, and I'll make more videos about mistakes later down the line. Let me know if there is any particular kind of mistakes you guys want to know about. But yeah, write comments below so we can help each other out with figuring out frustrating and irritating parts of making pedals. And share this video with anyone that you think could have some insight into helping, so that we can do more videos about common mistakes, because that is actually something that is lacking. And I know that it can maybe be a little bit humbling to have to admit defeat when building things, when you're trying to be creative, but it's okay. We all learn, hopefully. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Stay awesome and cool, and go and build whatever. Just have fun, be creative. Don't take things too seriously, and if you get frustrated and angry at something, don't quit. Just put it down, take a nice walk or a warm bath or something, and relax and realize that it's okay, and that you're gonna be fine, and that whatever issue it is, you're gonna solve it eventually. Just relax.